Yeah, hi. Thank you for coming tonight. We very much appreciate it. One of the reasons that Kelvin and I decided to write this book together, which of course, having a reporter and a cop writing a book together is obviously an odd thing to begin with because, a relationship between a reporter and a cop is not always, we not always see things eye to eye, but part of the interesting point of, yeah, we're the pencil necks. But anyway, the point of it was to sort of get out of the cycle of understanding of homicide and murder in Baltimore, which is difficult because the media and the way the media is structured, crime is a very sort of dramatic and ongoing story in Baltimore, but we don't really take the time to look at it from a perspective of, it's not immediate. Like at this particular moment, let's try to understand it. And the reason we did that is fairly simple. Baltimore is consistently one of the most violent cities in the country, no matter what. I mean, right now, the mayor will tell you that crime is down. And that's true. But if you look at us relative to other cities, we are one of the most violent. I think in the top 5. I don't know exactly. So the question is why? And the question is, why do we keep doing the same things? I mean, in Baltimore City for the past 10 years, 20 years, as long as I've been a reporter, the answer to that has been some form of law enforcement. We had the zero tolerance policy where we arrested 100,000 people a year. So it's always been sort of a question of law enforcement or a question of building more prisons. And it's ironic that, Kelvin and I worked on this together, but, my thinking was when I approached him and we talked about doing this, or he approached me actually, was to provide some context, was to take these cases, starting with the particular and the details, and try to evince some sort of understanding of why Baltimore has such a penchant for murder. And that's not an easy question. But rather than be overly philosophical, Kelvin was able to share with me cases and his insight into some cases that are fairly extreme, which is what the story of crime is in Baltimore singularly, which is that it's a laboratory of the extremes. You have extreme behavior. Some of the cases that Kelvin worked on are just difficult to comprehend when a 14-year-old child, shoots a woman he doesn't know from 100 yards across the street. Or, a group of teen girls set a man on fire while he's alive. These are things, as citizens of the city, that are difficult for us to comprehend, but must be comprehended in some way that's meaningful so that we can perhaps alleviate this problem, I guess, would be what I was looking for. I cover crime as a reporter, and I'm part of the problem. I mean, I go to a crime scene, write a story, interview a few people. Now I'm a producer for Fox 45, and part of the problem is that it's just a 24-hour news cycle. So we were hoping that this book, by combining both of our perspectives, would add something to the equation of our understanding of crime and what it means and why do people kill. I mean, you have to think about it. We're a fairly unique city in that 600 or 700 times a year, someone picks up a gun and aims it at someone and pulls a trigger. And that doesn't include, stabbings or people who die from overdoses and undetermined deaths, which are unclassified. It's quite unusual compared to any other city in this country besides Detroit and a few others, compared to Europe and other places. We, in many times in many social situations, choose violence to settle matters that might otherwise be settled, in less violent ways. So the question is, what are the combination of factors? What is it in the psyche of the people who choose to take another life? And the only way, really, you're going to know that is from someone like Kelvin, who has sat in the box with people, has been up close to people who we would consider, most of us consider, have done things that would be absolutely reprehensible to us, but however seem commonplace. So that being said, Kelvin, maybe you want to talk a little bit about why you decided to participate in this or why we did this together.
But first off, I wanted to say that the book also talks about how difficult the homicide detective's job is working here in Baltimore City. These guys go out each and every day. They experience some of the difficult challenges dealing with families who have lost loved ones. These guys sometimes these ladies and gentlemen sometimes have to put their families second to deal with the families who lost loved ones to bring closure to their lives. So these detectives, including myself at one point in time, we spent a lot of time in what we call the box. That's the interview room down in Baltimore City, our homicide unit. We deal with some of the most violent criminals, a lot of repeat offenders, and we try to do sometimes the impossible, get confessions out of why they uh, done some of the things they've done, taken another human being's life. Sometimes it's a difficult challenge. Sometimes a person just do it out of, for example, love for another. I would say a love, hate for another person. One of the cases particularly is the case with Melvin Wilson I wanted to talk about, who in fact thought he was in love with a 14-year-old, a 9-year-old kid. I'm sorry, Irvin Harris. Irvin, I guess, to Melvin betrayed his love by wanting to buy a young girl who lived in the neighborhood a gift. Because of that, for some reason, Melvin snapped and lured the little kid up into the woods and took his life. And that was difficult because a lot came out of that case where social service was involved in this case, where the mother was warned several times to have this person stay away from her kid. The mother herself wound up going to jail for not protecting her kid the way she should have, like she should have. So, also the case of Melody Smith, who the police department repeatedly received calls to come to her house, and dealing with a person by the name of Gregory Tucson. He kind of lured the police officers away from Miss Smith and directed the police officers towards him to show that he was the victim and not Melody Smith. And the entire time it was Melody Smith. And in fact, I think the police officers responded to her house at least 50 times before we located Miss Smith on a couch for chairs, strangled and beat to death. In fact, at one point, while we were at the location, Miss Smith helped us out in her case by FedExing herself a letter indicating who the suspect was who killed her, and that letter arrived at her residence while we were there that day. So, and that's also one of the things that we discussed in this book right here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Kelvin, we talked quite a bit during his time when I was a reporter and he was a homicide detective. One of the things that he let me know is how dysfunctional the system was in many cases, like in the case of Miss Smith, who had filed a protection order and called the police 50 times. And also the situation you had with the state's attorney's office, where many times, Kelvin would say, look, I know who did this, I know who murdered this person. And I have a witness, but I don't have two witnesses. So the state's attorney's office will not issue a warrant. And this became a big issue in the campaign with Miss Jessamy versus our current state's attorney, Greg Bernstein. But to me, it was, I mean, you get a call from Kelvin, he says, look, I could take a murder off the street right now, but I can't get a warrant. And to me, that spoke to, dysfunctionality in the system that we as citizens of Baltimore pay a great deal of money to protect us, and that oftentimes seems lost in politics and a lot of the other things that shouldn't really infect an organization that's trying to take murderers off the street. There should be some sense of priority, but and that was a big problem.
And I see a lot of homicide detectives around in the audience right now who they can also understand what we've been through down on the floor of homicide, with we have suspects out there walking the streets right now that we know should be off the streets. If we had a little bit of help from then the state's attorney's office, but now we got, as you say, Greg Bernstein, who's in office right now, who vowed to let us take these cases to court with these one witnesses and try to get these people prosecuted off the streets. But for a homicide detective, it's very frustrating because a person committed the murder. You could talk to that person. You talk to that person while he's on the street. You know he did this murder, but you don't have the tools to take them off the street because that lies with someone else. And I think, to some extent, that's not fair to the detective who work hard out there trying to get these murderers off the street.
Well, what was the thing you used to say to me about the building? He used to call me up all the time and say, what do you say?
When I'm driving into work, coming out, while I'm driving my vehicle down the Fair Street, I will always look up at the building, the police headquarters, and I always say, I called Steve one time, there's more problems in that building right there than there is on the street. So if we can just get the building straight first, maybe we can help the people a little bit better out there on the streets of Baltimore City.
And I think it's, for both of us, when we, Kelvin has to go to the homes of people whose son or daughter has been taken from this world. And as a reporter, we also talk to those families. And, when you see all the sort of obstacles to clear thinking and truth